Hey guys, so in this video I'm going to be taking a look at the EcoFlow Delta Pro 3. And really it's the big brother to the smaller model that I showed you guys in the past. If you guys haven't seen that video, you can check it out. But I've been using this for close to a year now. And I use it on the job. We traveled cross country with this guy actually in the back of the car, and we used it every day, pretty much a full discharge and charge every single day with cooking or powering a fridge. So we did a lot of stuff with this unit. So when it came down to it, I was excited to take a look at this larger model. So that other little one I just showed you is an 1800 watt model. The Delta Pro 3 is a 4000 watt model. Now it does say 8000 watts on the box when I got that, but that is just for surge. And a lot of people rate the surge as the actual output. So I don't know why they do that. I guess it sounds better. So this can surge up to 8000 watts, but it's a 4000 watt continuous output inverter inside of this. And then it can take in up to 2600 watts of solar. So it has two different MPPTs, and both of those can take, I think one is around 1600 watts and the other one is 1000 watts. But just like all the other EcoFlow gear, this is largely software. So the hardware is something to take a look at. We'll go around the outside of this unit, but there's a lot to the software of EcoFlow. Meaning it's not just about the unit itself, but it can communicate with a generator. So there's a generator option for this. You can get an EcoFlow generator to go with this. This is a 4000 watt unit, like I mentioned, but you can parallel up to 3 of these if you use the EcoFlow gateway, so their smart panel. And with that, you'd have a continuous 12,000 watts of output, which is pretty crazy. But you can also add extra storage to these. So you have that 4 kilowatt hour battery inside of it, and you can add another 2 of those. So each unit could have 12 kilowatt hours. This does have standard charging options, so you can charge it from a 120 volt output from your wall plug, just like you would the smaller unit that I showed or any of their other units. But because you got a larger battery in here, you're probably somewhere around 3 to 4 hours to charge it fully, even with fast charging. I think it charges at around 1700 watts, so it might be less than that actually. This does have lithium iron phosphate chemistry inside of it, and they rate it for around 4000 cycles before you have that 80% depth of discharge. And that's where they usually rate things, at 80% after a certain amount of cycles. But 4000 cycles, you would have to cycle this completely down and all the way back up. You're talking over a decade. So if anything gives out, it's not going to be the cells inside of this unit. So I mentioned the expansion batteries, I mentioned the solar charging, but you also have a fast charging option with this. You can even hook this up to an EV charger. So you'd have to get a plug for that. What comes with this is just a 120 volt cord and the manual. So it's pretty bare bones in the box itself, but there's lots of accessories you can get. So with the fast charging option, it wouldn't take very long at all. But you can also charge with solar and AC at the same time. And I did that. I'll show you guys in just a few minutes. So let's take a look at the outside of the unit all the way around it, and then we'll do some testing. I want to see if it can run some standard loads, which I'm pretty confident it can. But I'll also put it all the way up to that 4000 watts, see how well it runs. All right, so looking at the front, we have our standard 120 volt outlets right here. And then on this side, you can enable 240 volts. And this one right here is the one I'm interested in, the 30 amp locking plug. And that is the one I'm going to be testing with. I'm going to hook something up to that and we can test the output of it. Then up top here, you have the DC charging options. Both are fast chargers, USB-C and USB. On the left side of the unit here, you have a 30 amp outlet, 120 volt, but it is a 30 amp output. So people would probably, in some cases, use that for their RVs. I like the doors. Also, I like the fact that they kind of categorized or put everything in bundles of what it belongs to. So on the other side, we looked on the left, that was a 30 amp, 120 volt output. This side here is 12 volt outputs. Various ones you may or may not need, but nothing wrong with having them there. The back side, it's actually pretty busy. So this is the one higher voltage input. I thought it was interesting that XTI, is that the name of the connection? Anyway, the low voltage is the I. You can see the metal clip right there. You guys can probably make it out. The other one can just be a regular XT connection. So this is the high voltage here. It's 30 to 150 volts input and 50 amps max. And then we've got this over here is 11 volts to 60 volts. So this would be the low voltage one, and that's 20 amp max. This is where that standard wall plug comes in, your 120 volt input. AC power in and out. So this is where you're going to hook this to that EcoFlow home panel, that gateway. And again, you can parallel up to 3 of these. So that's where that's going to happen. Over here is the extra battery port, and here's another. So both, if you're utilizing both batteries, you could hook to there. Unfortunately, you can't get more with communication anyway than that. But I'm going to talk about how you might want to expand this with just a standard battery. Yeah, before I forget, because I was going to forget, I was hooked into the low voltage input before with a 400 watt solar panel, not ideal sunshine, and I was charging the unit at the same time as I was hooked into the wall. So I think we were getting to around 1900 watts, but you could certainly get much higher if you had more sun coming in. It's just a shame they can't get a higher voltage on these, because with the size or with the output of this unit, it would be nice to get around 4,000 watts of solar on something like this, because that's really one of the downsides of this unit. Although 2,600 watts is fine, you could charge this unit up, assuming you maxed out the solar, you could charge it up in 2 hours or less, but it would be nice to have a lot more solar on here, 5,000 watts, because that's something you're going to see on some of these all-in-one solar units that you can install yourself. Even the small ones can usually take in around 5,000 watts, and they'll have a 500 volt max. Then last but not least, this thing is 114 pounds, I think. So you're going to want to use this if it's on the floor somewhere. Rolls around fine, no problems. It's actually pretty easy to move around once you do that. But yeah, getting it up on the table here was nice. Depending on how you're wanting to use this, you may just want the 120 volt output and not even bother with the 240. But if you're going to use the 240 volt output and you're not going to be going, purchasing that home panel like I mentioned before, that EcoFlow, that fancy gateway, then you're going to want a different option on how to get the power, 240 volt power, to your panel. Now, you might just be wanting this for an emergency, so it might not stay hooked up all the time. And in that case, you're going to want to be able to plug into this output right here, preferably, and that would go into your panel. But how to do that safely is the option. And you're definitely going to need a lockout breaker for that, because you want to treat this like it's a generator. You don't want both power sources going into your panel at the same time accidentally if the power comes back on. So at the very least, you're going to have a lockout breaker, but then you're going to need a way to plug it in. So there's a few options there. You can utilize a transfer switch. There's a couple different ways to be able to hook it up. For the purposes of testing, I'm going to be using this cord here. It's a NEMA 30 connection, but this is not recommended because this is what's referred to as a suicide cord. So once I hook it into here and turn the 240 volt power on, then this is going to be hot. And we never want an exposed prong there that is hot, whether it's touching one side of the 120 or both to get your full 240 volt load. That's not something you want to do. So as you turn this on here, for instance, as we turn the unit on here, if we turn it was already off or already on. As we turn the 240 volt output on, these are hot, but since they're a female connection, there's no risk of being harmed. So yeah, once I plug this into here, this would be hot. So this is not a good idea, but yeah, you need a clean way in order to attach it to the house and then have that lockout breaker to, again, treat it like a generator. I did turn the output off already, by the way. So just in case you guys are concerned, if you're seeing this video, that means I lived through the experience. This is the outlet I have here for the charge inverters, or this is one of them anyway. All right, so that should be L2. And then this over here is L1. All right, so we've got power on both legs. I got the heat gun and a heater over here. Then we'll go check the EcoFlow. Actually, I'll just check the app. All right, so that is 2,800 watts coming into it right now. I'm going to see, let me hook the solar up. See what that looks like as far as while I'm using it and the solar inputs coming in. Into the low voltage one here. All right, so we're bringing in 100 something watts right now. 118, 120, 130. You guys can see why the panel maybe isn't performing as best as it could. This is a 440 watt panel, but I had a mishap with it months ago. Unfortunately, I didn't catch that on camera. So very quiet fan on here, even at 2800 watts. And that is over half of its rated output, continuous output. So what I'm going to do now is hook a charge inverter to it and put that to some use. I'm going to hook that to a battery bank, and I'm not going to be able to get to the full output of my 48-volt charge inverter because that would max this unit out. I think that pulls around 5300 watts, 54, in that area. So I'll have to crank the charge inverter down a bit, but that still will be a neat test. All right, so I've got the charge inverter hooked up here, but I haven't adjusted the amperage, and it's going to trip the unit if I leave it as is. So we're going to have to move this. We'll go down to 80 amps, see what happens. Whoa, okay, so 80 amps was a bit much. You guys can see it's at 4,500 watts of output right now. So it's been doing this for almost a minute now that we've been over the rated output. All right, just clicked out. I think we got around a minute and a half with it like that at 4,500 watts. So let's go down, I think, to around 65 amps of output on the charge inverter. All right, that is about as close as I can get. 3960. And on the charge inverter, I think output-wise to my battery bank, it's 69.5 amps. All right, now I'm going to call this a success. Could be that if you run 40 minutes, then something occurs, but I'm not thinking so. This is their maximum continuous output, and I don't think it's going to have an issue with that. So I'm going to stop the test here, and then I'm going to show you guys a couple things. I'm going to test one more thing, but I want to show you what I was thinking as far as battery first. So I'll be the first to admit that this is not like the ideal option, because the batteries that hook to the EcoFlow will have communication. They'll have all kinds of stuff that this option won't have. Plus, this is a 48-volt rack battery, but there's no way for it to charge from the EcoFlow. But it can feed the EcoFlow like a solar panel or a battery. So if you had a cheap charge controller for this, you could charge this battery up. And if you've maxed out your battery capacity for this guy, you've got 2 expansion batteries on the top, you could have this battery feed it also. So right now I'm hooked to the positive and negative. I built this here, but there's a fuse on the positive and negative of these ring terminals. And then it goes over here to the same connection that a solar panel would go to on the EcoFlow. So right now I still have those solar panels going to it right now, but I think there's only like 20 watts coming out of it now. So we'll hook this into it here, and then we'll see how much wattage the eco-worthy battery can give to the EcoFlow unit here. So we'll turn this on. All right, I heard a click on the EcoFlow. So let's see what it's saying. Yeah, so not bad. It's showing an input of 1,000 watts coming out of the rack battery into the eco-worthy unit. So you could do this with a 48-volt golf cart battery also. Whatever kind of works for your space, whatever. The only reason I showed the eco-worthy is because it is pretty cheap. Like, these are still around the $800 range. And the expansion batteries for this are around $1,400, I think. In that range, $1,200 to $1,400. But again, there's no way to charge this guy. Like, the unit's not going to charge him back up. So you'd need a separate, like, cheap charge controller to keep this topped off. And then that feeds this. But then, you know, you kind of have to wonder, is it really worth it? Because you could have the solar panels feed directly to this. I don't know. It's an option. I thought I'd show you guys that there's another way to have sort of an extra storage ability with a rack battery or a 48-volt golf cart battery. You could use a 12-volt battery too. Either way, or a 24-volt battery even. The range of that MPPT in the back, because it thinks it's solar coming in. The range there would allow for that. Because the range is, man, it's kind of hard to see with this lighting. But the range is 11 to 60 volts. So a 12-volt battery all the way up to this 48-volt rack battery that I'm using, that's going to top off around 56 volts. So yeah, it works. And you can see there we've got a little over 18 amps coming out of the eco-worthy battery. You can see it on the Bluetooth app going into the EcoFlow. So both the Ecos working together. If you guys plan on doing something like this, this is 10 gauge wire and I have 20 amp fuses in here. So you definitely don't want to take any chances and just run a ring terminal to that MPPT connection on the EcoFlow and have some potential issues. This will not allow more current than it can handle. So yeah. Anyway, I don't know if anybody's going to use this option, but it's neat either way. All right, so for my final act, I've got this hooked up again, got everything on, and we're gonna start our well pump up and see how well it starts that up. It's a 3/4 horse well pump. It's probably the largest inductive load I have in the house because I have soft starts on the HVAC unit. So I'm gonna have a couple other smaller loads on this too, some lights, everything else, but I'm gonna run my water and we'll see what happens. All right, we should be good here. Yeah, okay. So now the EcoFlow is running everything in the shop. So right now that's lights, and the mini split hasn't kicked back on, but that's lights and the pool pump outside. So now it's time to run the water, see what happens. Kind of a side note, but the thing has a ridiculously long range on its Bluetooth. You can still see it from like 60, 70 feet away inside of a metal shop. So it's got a great range on it. Woo! Yeah, check that out. So you can hear the fans now. Actually, let me go over to the back. But did you guys see that? On the app, it actually showed it spiked up to a little over 4,000 watts, like 4,200 watts, and then went back down. Yeah, you really can't hardly hear them. Let me see if I can get my mic close. Yeah. So yeah, they weren't kidding about that surge capability. It did a really good job. So I wouldn't run my hot water heater at the same time if it was an electric one, unless I had a hybrid. That can, if you put that in eco mode, mine will do like 700 watts or something of usage. But you could run then, because I had over 1,000 watts on this when the well pump kicked on. So you could have your fridges and basic necessities and still start up a 3/4 horse well pump with this unit. And you're really not talking about a difficult installation here. So I've just got a cord running from this to my box. But yeah, like I said, you can get an electrician to help you with that part. But this can be something you just wheel out. Just keep it in the garage, wheel it into the house when you lose power, especially if you have some expansion batteries. All right, guys. Well, I think this is a cool unit. I really think it's neat that it could start the well pump. It can run that continuous 4,000 watts without an issue. Like I said, I think the big thing is battery capacity and then that solar input. So that's decent. That solar input amount is decent, but it would be nicer to be up into the 4,000 watt range at least. But I get that they're limited. I mean, this thing is all in one box. So I know they're limited, but the technology keeps improving. So I would imagine at some point you're probably going to see that. So if you had this hooked up to just bare essentials, if you had this running fridges, lights, and even if you could just put some foldable solar panels out and just use the 120 volt plugs, you could run for quite some time, especially with the solar too. So in the event of an emergency, if you don't want to drag your generator out, if you don't have a generator, this could be your generator. As for how long it lasts, it's tough to say. All fridges, all appliances, they're all a little different. So you'd have to know the ratings on your fridge. But I mean, just a fridge alone, if you weren't to use solar on this or if you didn't have any expansion batteries or anything, it would run it for well over a day, I would imagine, over 24 hours. Because fridges will have these little surges, then they'll go back down and they'll cycle, especially the modern ones, and they'll run for hours or not run at all once they've reached that maximum or minimum temperature. But again, if this is hooked in, like I was explaining before, into the actual house, you could have this hooked into a separate panel or a smart panel that's compatible with this and just cycle this every day. Because like I said, it is good for 4,000 cycles as far as the cells are concerned. So you could use this every day and just have it powering a few loads that you always want to keep topped off. It can also be set as a UPS, an uninterrupted power supply. So in that case, you could plug all the essentials you want into it and it could stay that way. Starlink, fridges, all that. And then if the power does go out, this kicks on automatically. So that's another option. I think use cases though, More commonly, although it can sit in somebody's garage and kind of be ready for a storm, I think a lot of people are going to be using it in van builds and for portable for RVs, because this is right at that threshold. It's heavy, but you can still get it in to an RV or something when you need power if you're boondocking. The downside to these, though, versus a modular system or an all-in-one inverter like the 6000 XP, for example, behind me, is price. So you're going to pay more for the batteries, you're going to pay more for the power itself. A 6000 XP is 6,000 watts of split phase power. So instead of just having 4, you'd have 3 and 3. So this is 2 and 2 on each leg. That would be 3 and 3. Then you'd need to get batteries with that. So let's say you went with the EG4 batteries there. You'd be at $3,800 to have two rack batteries. That's 200 amp hours. That's 10 kilowatts of storage. That's not including wiring it into a panel or anything else. That's just straight up inverter and batteries, right around $3,900. This unit here. At this point in the video, I gave some bad numbers and I noticed it while I was editing it. So I thought I might pause myself in the best pose possible to share the actual numbers. You guys can see them there on the screen. The EcoFlow Delta Pro 3 is $2,700 plus the expansion batteries $1,900. So those are actually quite a bit of money each, those expansion batteries. And that of course can vary with sales, but definitely an increase over the unit I just mentioned, the 6000 XP. Another reason people get these is the convenience. They don't really have to know all the itty gritty of stuff. You know, if they were going to hook this into a panel, they could have an electrician do that part and that's it. Then it's just ready. A solar system, an actual 6000 XP, you're going to need to know a bit more if you're going to be doing any of the installation yourself. Even if you have an electrician, you need to know the ins and outs. These are a lot more plug and play. Like I said, they're also portable, so you can't haul that around. A lot of people will put them in their RVs. I've actually seen that, but just if you wanted to use it picnicking or camping or something like that, this can be moved around and still output power. So it's a give and take. If people are looking long term and they have a cabin somewhere, I usually recommend a system like that with the 6000 XP or something larger, even the 12,000 XP. But I also know people with systems like this. They've got a couple of these paralleled or Blue Eddies, and they're doing fine with that also. So I don't think it's one of those things where you have to have one or the other. You really could have either one, especially people that are kind of retired or a little older and they don't want to have to learn the ins and outs of solar. They can buy a unit like this and be ready for hurricanes, any kind of mess like that, especially with the expansion batteries. If I was going to get this or something similar to this to be able to prepare for a storm, I would get at least one expansion battery with it. The expansion battery is the exact same kilowatt hours, as what's in the unit here. So every time you add one of those, you're essentially adding what's in this unit again. Compared to some modular systems like I was describing back there, ones you can build yourself, the batteries are kind of pricey. But again, to make this, I guess it depends on what you want to do with it. If you're just camping with it, it's probably fine. But yeah, if I was going to prepare for a storm, if I had this for a backup to be able to run my well, my fridge, my lights during a storm, I would definitely have more backup power. You could look into a 48-volt battery like I showed midway through the video, but I don't know. I mean, that kind of brings you into sort of leaning towards a system like that anyway. I mean, it's a neat option. You can do it with a golf cart battery, a 48-volt golf cart battery, a cheap one like that Temgo I showed a while back. You could do that. You could have that, but you are going to have to charge that battery back up. But assuming you work out those logistics, you are going to get another 5 kilowatt hours worth of battery that way. And those golf cart batteries were like $750. So they're almost half price if you did that. Might be worth putting a charge controller up and figuring out the logistics of all that. Anyway, guys, I hope this video was helpful. I know there's a lot more that can be done with these units. I didn't even utilize anything on the 12-volt side. I didn't do anything with the 120-volt outlet on the other side, the 30-amp. There's a bunch you could do with this, as far as software too, and different things you can hook into it. The alternator package that you can get if you're going to use this in an RV or a van, and it can charge as you drive. Bunch of stuff. But yeah, hopefully the basics here were good enough for you guys. I appreciate you watching. I'm going to leave a link in the description to this here and an expansion battery if you guys are interested. Yeah, thanks for watching, guys, and stay tuned.